When Donald Trump was running to become the US president, immigration was at the center of his campaign. And after being elected, his administration enacted some of the harshest immigration policies in the nation's recent history. His zero tolerance approach led to almost 3,000 children being separated from their parents at the US Mexico border. And last week, he promised to expel millions of undocumented immigrants. But hours before the deportations were due to begin, Trump decided to delay them at the request of the Democrats. Not everyone in the US supports the president's tough immigration stance, including this man, Scott Warren, who provided food, water, and lodging to some people who had crossed the US-Mexico border illegally. He was arrested and faced 20 years in prison. A jury couldn't agree on whether to convict him, so he walked free. But he could still face a retrial. So, should border activists be punished or praised for helping those in need? Let's bring in our panel now. Deedra Abboud joins me from Scottsdale, Arizona. She's an attorney and a former Democratic Senate candidate. She met Scott Warren a few weeks before his arrest. And in Washington, D.C. is Mark Krikorian. He's the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies, a think tank that favors lower immigration. I thank you both for joining us. So, Mark, there was a mistrial. They were unable to reach a verdict. But when you look at Scott Warren's case, do you believe that he committed a crime?
There's no question he committed a crime. The question is, was the reason for the mistrial the fact that the prosecutors overreached and, overcharged? In other words, there's no question that he should have been punished for what he did. He clearly broke the law. The real question for a juror would be, should they be convicting him for something that would lead to potentially 20 years in jail? That seems to me the calculation that the jurors were making, not whether people should be encouraging illegal immigrants to sneak into the United States.
Mark, when we think of give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, wasn't he expressing very American values here and showing compassion to helpless people?
That Huddled Masses poem was a fundraising gimmick for the Statue of Liberty 130 years ago at this point. It has nothing to do with American law. We have had high levels of immigration at various points in our history, and we've had low levels of immigration. And the idea that somehow because we have, in fact, welcomed immigration and continue to welcome immigration on our terms in the past doesn't mean that anyone in the world gets to just walk across the border, and that people who help those sneaking in violation of the law, which sets certain limits and criteria that people are supposed to comply with, that anyone helping people violate the law and sneak into the country should somehow just be, not held responsible for his criminal actions. This guy committed a crime, but the crime was probably smaller in the sense of how much punishment it should have had than what the prosecutors were trying to get. And that's probably why he ended up with this mistrial.
Deirdre, has Mark managed to convince you in any way?
How disappointing to learn that my entire identity as an American of welcoming the tired masses, protecting people's humanity, welcoming people that are being threatened with death, not allowing people to die in the desert from thirst. How disappointing to find out that that was a fundraising gimmick and that my entire identity and a lot of Americans' identities was in fact a joke. I don't believe that. I grew up believing that we are American, we have values, we stand up for many, many good things in the world, and not allowing people to die in the desert, intentionally allowing people to die in the desert by intentionally creating a wall that leaves the desert open for people to cross as their only option, and with the intention that they will either die or we will catch them. 155 people died in the exact same area that Scott Warren was around, right by Ajo. I've been to Ajo. I actually met Scott Warren within days before his arrest. And the people that he was arrested for helping were on the property, not even in the desert part where usually people die. They had actually gotten out and were on his property, the property where No More Death has their house. And the border agents came to spy on their house and arrested him for supposedly helping people cross the border when in fact he was just getting them water and food and not asking for their papers as he was being a good Samaritan.
Mark Krikorian, is it clear to you at the very least that if Scott Warren didn't do what he was doing, and if others like him don't do what they're doing, then more people will die? Do you accept that at least?
Not necessarily, no, not at all, because what he was doing essentially was he was abetting alien smuggling. In other words, he was part of an alien smuggling network and conspiracy. And frankly, if we're talking about the values the United States is based on, the rule of law is the first value the United States is based on. Nobody is forced to make it across the desert. They're already in Mexico. We're talking about Central Americans mostly at this point, who have already escaped the supposed countries where they're being persecuted, and none of them, in fact, are being persecuted. They're simply coming here for work. To the extent that I would agree that we do create a kind of magnet, it's that we do not do enough to make it impossible, or at least as difficult as possible, for illegal immigrants to find work. Because that's why illegal immigrants do this. They figure it's worth the risk, which these people often don't even understand because they're not from desert regions. They're from more tropical regions in the south. They're not familiar with deserts. They figure it's worth the risk because we don't do enough to keep them from getting jobs.
Okay,
they're coming for jobs, and we need to stop that.
So Deedra, it's too lucrative for these people. That's why they're willing to brave it and risk it. And someone like Scott is just exacerbating the problem.
I can't imagine someone risking their life going over several borders, not just one, into a desert to their great peril with their children just because they'd like to have a better job. That's not why people migrate in dangerous situations. I'd also like to address that helping people in the Underground Railroad during the slave times and helping Jews escape from Nazi Germany was also illegal. So we have to consider whether laws are moral or not. And while I'm all for having an immigration system that also upholds our values of not allowing people to die in the desert, at the same time, I don't think that we should be prosecuting people because they failed to ask for papers when they were giving water and food to a stranger. And this, by the way, is not the first case. It's just the most highlighted case. We have had several cases in Arizona where people have been picked up for leaving water in the desert and some of them were prosecuted, successfully prosecuted. Many of them were prosecuted. And we've also had people who found Americans who found migrants near the desert who were near death. And as they were trying to transport them to the only hospital, which is 3 hours away from Ajo, they were also charged with aiding and abetting an alien, as opposed to a Good Samaritan law. Okay. So for me, there's not a conflict with telling people that you can't be a transporter intentionally and being paid as a coyote to get people over the border illegally and helping people not die in the desert. I feel like those are two different things, and law and Americans are smart enough to figure it out.
Mark Krikorian, something that is fascinating to me as an outsider. I'm not an American. I have no dog in this fight. But on this very program, I've had someone from the Mountain Minutemen. They patrol the borders. They're vigilantes. They speak very clearly about shooting at these people on sight and sometimes shooting to kill. Now, often they work with authorities and they have their binoculars and they have their people stationed all over the place and they try to protect the border. So someone like that who can tell me on international television, oh no, I'm looking for these people and I'll take them out if I have to. That person is never prosecuted, yet somebody who's giving food and water to somebody who crosses the border is. Doesn't it tell you something's fundamentally wrong?
No, because they haven't been shooting at aliens. That, in fact, is a crime, and they would be arrested. What you're getting is people who are basically acting out in front of their, Skype cameras on their computers. But the extremism is what we need to avoid. Both the extremism of your other guest who basically compares immigration laws to Nazism and slavery, because that's explicitly
No,
what
that's
she
not
just
what I
did.
said at all.
Or yes,
Nope,
that is what
not
you
at
did.
all.
Or the
Nope, no, it isn't.
extremism, or the
Absolutely
extremism
not.
of
Nope.
someone who threatens to use armed violence privately, in other words, not under government sanction, to shoot people coming across the border. These extremes need to be avoided. We have a border. It can be enforced through normal law enforcement means, and people like Scott Warren, whether they get paid for it or not, and they do in fact get paid because he's supporting himself somehow, they just get paid by foundations and others, are getting paid to undermine the borders and immigration laws of the United States, and they deserve prosecution.
Okay, hold your thought there for a second, Deedra, because I want to broaden this out, because this doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a context, and under the Trump administration, things have heated up when it comes to immigration, right? I want to talk about the DOJ recently explaining and justifying the conditions for children in the camps that are under federal jurisdiction. Some have called them concentration camps, very controversially. Let's have a little listen to the DOJ for a second.
I think there's fair reason to find that those things may be part of safe and sanitary.
Maybe are a part. What do you say maybe? You mean there are circumstances when a person doesn't need to have a toothbrush, toothpaste, and soap for days?
Well, I think in CBP custody, it's frequently intended to be much shorter term. So it may be that for a shorter term stay in CBP custody that some of those things may not be required.
Let me just add to that very quickly before I come back to the two of you. So, justification from the DOJ that we don't need to give these kids toothbrushes, toothpaste, and soap. On Twitter, Michael Scott Moore, a journalist and author who spent 977 days as a hostage of Somali pirates, said, well, Somali pirates gave me toothpaste and soap. Mark, before you say I'm making false equivalences and so on, when we look at this administration, is the message to people who want to cross the border, we really don't care about you, we don't care at all?
You are, in fact, making false equivalences. Is it any surprise that remote border patrol stations, which are not in any way equipped to deal with a tsunami of people who are being lured here by loopholes in our law that the Democratic leadership in Congress refuses
it's toothbrushes and toothpaste and soap for kids. It's soap for kids.
There is no way that they can deal with 800,000 people a year at that rate coming into border patrol stations that have one or two people manning them. It is no surprise that they haven't been able to deal with this, and Congress still has not authorized the extra funding so that they can, in fact, provide toothpaste and toothbrush for these kids. But none of that even solves the problem. The problem is we have a set of loopholes in our law that make it worth your while to bring a child with you. It becomes a golden ticket to be released forever into the United States. People are acting on that incentive. Until we change that incentive, this kind of thing is going to continue. In other words, the Democrats have created this flow of people and then are complaining that the flow of people that they have created is not being treated well enough, and then they're not appropriating the money to actually take care of people.
Say you're absolutely right on everything. Do you at least accept that these kids probably deserve toothbrushes and soap?
Well, it's no deserve. It's how do you take care of people, basically. If they're going to be there, if you're going to be in your custody for a long period of time, obviously. But the whole point is they are not equipped to deal with this. The Immigration Service is looking for some way of handing these kids on. The Health and Human Services Department is the one that they're supposed to hand them to. They no longer have any capacity to take any more kids. The only alternative is literally to let these kids out on the street. And then what happens? I mean, this is blaming the victim, basically, which is to say that the government literally has no way of dealing with this flow of people that the Democratic leadership in Congress refuses to do anything to stop.
Deedra, the government's the victim here. Why are you blaming the victim?
I know, right? So you have a government that you had the Republican controlling all parts of the government for 2 years and just didn't know what to do. And now that the Democrats only have one section of the government, it's their fault that they haven't done anything. And it's these children's fault because if they hadn't stepped across the border at 8 years old, then they wouldn't be in the situation of a government entity who's paying $700 per person per day to private prison industry to take care of these children, can't afford to give them any space, blankets, something other than a cold floor, soap, and toothpaste. I can put them in the Hilton for less than $700 a day, and they get all of those things for free, plus AC and a bed. We should control who comes into our borders, but we should also keep our humanity. And the equivalency that I'm making is that someone giving water to a person coming out of the desert who could be dehydrating and die is what's equivalent to helping people in the Underground Railroad that was illegal. And people in the Underground Railroad did a lot more. They actually had an underground network to get people across the states into other states where they could be safe. But to pretend that the government is a poor thing with no money, no resources, and no history of how to deal with this situation, all I can say is, thank God this isn't American children that our government is saying they don't know what to do with. And thank God that it's other people's kids that we don't have to feel responsible for, and that we can sit back and be morally superior at how wonderful we are to our kids.
Well, you both made impassioned arguments here. Okay,
this is laughable.
Mark, listen,
is,
Mark, I'm running out of time, so, okay, Mark, I'm running out of time, so in 30 seconds, please, wrap me up.
We are enticing people to pay smugglers to bring their kids across the border, or people to bring their own kids across the border. Because if you have a kid, people like your other guests say that the laws don't apply. You get to come into the United States, you are released without consequence. You're never going to be deported, even when your asylum claim is rejected. And so people take these kind of risks. The government is overwhelmed in dealing with this flow of people, and the Democrats who have created this flow have been so far unwilling to provide funding in order to deal with the toothbrushes and soap situation. It's no surprise when you create an unmanageable situation that it becomes unmanageable.
Okay. Well, we've had a great opportunity to listen to both sides of this debate, and I appreciate that. Mark and Deedra, it's been good to have you on the Newsmakers. Thanks.
Thank you.